Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to the Way to Wow shows. I'm your host, Kevin Bemel, and today we're having a special edition of the Way to Wow shows in honor of Columbus Day. But before I get into that, I have to ask, how did you like the new opening? So for those of you who are longtime viewers of the show, when we pre-recorded more like a traditional TV show, you may remember that opening. And the music was created by a friend of mine. And I was going to look up his name because I wanted to give him, proper, what do you call it? Proper credit. Brandon McCullough. Yes. I met Brandon through my friend Michael Hartman. And this was during COVID. And Brandon is an enormously talented musician, as well as being a bartender. And he was, I believe, the first guest bartender we had on the very first episode of the Way to Wow shows. So Brandon wrote this wonderful theme. It's an original theme, so I don't get dinged for using it on YouTube. But I love it. I spent the morning playing around with how to set up that intro now that Restream has upgraded their platform. So if you have a moment and you have some thoughts, I'd sure love to hear them. But today, October 14th, 2024, is Columbus Day, a holiday that was completely uncontroversial when I was a kid and even a young man, and it has become controversial of late, unfortunately, and so what I thought I would do today is talk about the origins of Columbus Day, what its importance has been historically, because I think that it's mischaracterized, and then as I typically do on these special editions, do kind of a somewhat of an homage of some sort. So pull my notes up here so I can give you the correct. So, for anybody who was a kid, at least in my day, you learned the little rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And indeed, Columbus and his ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, arrived in what became known as America on October 12th of 1492. And in fact, historically, Columbus Day was celebrated on October 12th, the actual anniversary of Columbus and his crew landing here in the Americas. So it's the first known celebration of Columbus Day was actually in 1792, marking the 300th anniversary of Columbus's landing. And it was a holiday that started to gain prominence in the late 18th and early 19th century, largely by Italian-American immigrant communities. So Christopher Columbus, better known in his native tongue, I believe, as Cristoforo Colombo, was an Italian explorer. Now, he was sponsored by the Spanish monarchy. In fact, there's a whole story about how Queen Isabella gave Columbus some of her jewelry in order to finance his expedition. I don't know if that's historically accurate, but in any event, Christopher Columbus himself was Italian, and It's also surmised, by the way, that he was of Jewish heritage, and that one of his reasons for putting together this voyage was to escape the shoot, I can't think of what it's called, the Inquisition in Spain and Italy, and in the Roman Catholic Europe, where people who did not follow the strict doctrine of that time of the Roman Catholic Church could be imprisoned, censored, in some cases tortured, etc. Again, there's no hard evidence that Christopher Columbus was Jewish, although I can tell you that I first read about this as a child, so half a century ago. So it's been floating around at least since then. The push for it to become a national holiday increased in the 1800s, and it was partly as a way to push against anti-Catholic prejudice in this country. So, we tend to think of prejudice against perhaps Hispanic Americans, people coming from Mexico, El Salvador, etc. We tend to forget that in the 1800s, there were it was primarily Southern Europeans coming to this country, in particular Italians, who were very heavily discriminated against. So you used to see, signs up in places, no dogs and no Italians, things like that. So, and of course, Italian Americans didn't like this. Why should they? And so the promotion of Columbus Day became a way for them to show pride in their heritage. It should be noted, by the way, that Italian Americans, contrary to what was sometimes alleged about them, that they had split loyalty, or their loyalty was really to the Pope in Rome, they were by and large very dedicated Americans. If you can imagine how difficult it was even in the 1800s to get to this country, especially if you were rather poor, which a lot of the Italian immigrants were. And so to have the gumption to pull together the resources necessary to sail what was probably steerage on some boats. Steerage was the lowest class of passage on a boat. You were way down in the hold. Oftentimes you had no access to the out of doors. The food was marginal at best. Many times it was very, very tough passage. Whereas other passengers, first class, second class, even third class passengers, much more pleasant passage. But if you were poor, you did not travel. For sure, you didn't travel first class, and nor did you travel second class or otherwise. You traveled steerage. So, and in particular, the Roman Catholic fraternal organization, the Knights of Columbus, promoted the idea of Columbus Day, again, in order to show pride among Italian Americans in being Americans, but also in their Italian roots. And so it was really this group of immigrants that looked to strengthen their visibility in America, and also show, I wouldn't call them Native Americans, because they weren't. We think of Native Americans as being the Indian population, but shall we say more established Americans, the English and Germans and Scandinavians who were here in this country prior to the waves of Italian immigration that took place in the early 19th century. I'm sorry, early 19th century, right? The early 1800s. So it was really an effort for them to both become a more integral part of the United States, as well as to express pride in their heritage. And so in 1934, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Congress at that time established Columbus Day as a federal holiday after heavy lobbying by Italian American organizations, including, again, the Knights of Columbus. And the holiday was set for October 12th of each year. In 1971, the Uniform Monday Holiday Act was passed. I remember this as I was around 11 years old in 1971, and I remember all of a sudden holidays that had been midweek were moved to kind of the closest Monday to when the holiday was celebrated. So just for example, we used to celebrate Lincoln's birthday on, I believe it was February 12th or 14th, and Washington, meaning George Washington's birthday, on, I believe it was February 18th or something like that. So they created a holiday called President's Day, and it was I think the second Monday of February or something like that. And there was a lot of dissatisfaction with that. I frankly was among them. The fact of the matter is, not all presidents have been of the quality of George Washington, who was the first president. And among the many things that he did is he willingly gave up the power of the presidency after his second term, even as many Americans were clamoring for him to become essentially a monarch and the lifetime ruler, kind of like a lifetime president of the United States. Nonetheless, Washington felt that 2 terms was enough for any president, and he set the precedent of that was not broken until Franklin Delano Roosevelt was in office and ended up serving 4 terms, although he only served a very short time. In his 4th term, he died just a few months after being inaugurated. And then subsequent to that, an amendment was passed to the Constitution restricting presidents to 2 terms so that wouldn't happen again. So going back to Columbus Day, so Columbus Day was set for the second Monday of October of each year. And that's why here it is, Monday, October 14th, this is the second Monday of this year. And actually, wait a minute, this is the third Monday, isn't it? Hold the phone here. Nope, that's right. Yeah, it's the second Monday of this year. All of a sudden I was thinking something was wrong. But the second Monday of October, and that has become the day that Columbus Day is celebrated here in the United States. Just another slight digression. Many of you know that I'm a huge fan of the show Hogan's Heroes, and there's an episode. Actually, there's a couple of episodes where an Italian prison camp commander comes to Stalag 13, the first time ostensibly to learn how to be a better camp commandant from Colonel Klink. And he's recruited by Hogan and his heroes essentially to be a spy on what's going on in Italy for the benefit of the Allies, which he agrees to do. He subsequently almost gets caught, and so he flees Italy and comes back to Stalag 13, hoping that Hogan and his men will get him out of Germany and safely to Switzerland, Hogan agrees to do it if he'll help him gather some information on a new German weapon. And so he goes to see the Italian major, Bonicelli is his name, the character's name anyway. He goes to see Colonel Klink, and funny enough, because he's Italian, right? So he's trying to butter up Colonel Klink, and he tells him that he the three greatest men in his estimation are Christopher Columbus, Marconi, and Colonel Klink, right? So I'm not sure that Colonel Klink fits in there, but you can see that two of the most famous Italians of all time were Christopher Columbus and Marconi, who discovered radio. For those of you who are up on that part of history. So historically, Columbus Day was celebrated with parades, especially in cities with large Italian American populations like New York and Chicago, San Francisco. They would have floats, they would have music and displays of Italian American culture. And so it's interesting that the criticism of Christopher Columbus was he started what people call a genocide of the indigenous peoples here. That's a topic. Yeah, it's a bourbon topic, as I call it. But Columbus Day is certainly never was a celebration of the sort of negative side of Europeans coming to America. It was a celebration of Italian culture and Italian American heritage by this immigrant group. The most famous of these parades, which I believe is still going on, started in 1929, is the New York City Columbus Day Parade, and you'll see, I think, police officers of Italian descent marching in it, the Knights of Columbus, and other Italian civic organizations all march in the parade. There would also be cultural events at schools. It was a time when typically elementary school children would learn about Italian American culture. So they would typically learn about Columbus and his voyages of discovery. But beyond that, they would learn about Italian American customs. They would learn about a little bit about Roman Catholicism, perhaps. I think it's important to keep in mind that America was founded primarily, although not exclusively, by Protestant Christians. Maryland being an exception, it was a Roman Catholic colony from the get-go. And Roman Catholics long suffered from discrimination in this country, and I know as a child, I found it very interesting to learn about Catholic practices, and I know I went to at different times, particularly when I was in choir and we would go on tour. We would oftentimes sing in these absolutely awesome, and I mean that in the real meaning of that word, awe-inspiring cathedrals. In particular, I remember going on choir tour to San Francisco. I think I remember it at least in part because my dad went with us, and I really got to see my father in a different light on that trip. And we sang at both St. Ignatius Cathedral, which was an old cathedral, very well kept up, beautiful. I think it was built in the 1800s. And then St. Mary's Cathedral, sometimes known as the washing machine agitator, because it was a contemporary building and the form of the building looked somewhat like a washing machine agitator. But both of them were very profound experiences for me as a young man. And I was glad of having the opportunity to see what the Catholic Mass looked like, how it was performed. As you know, I'm Jewish, so it was never a thing of me, wanting to participate in it per se. But I was glad of the opportunity, like I said, to understand it better. And then I think maybe a year or two after that choir tour, I remember at Sunday school, Jewish Sunday school, the teacher I had, he did a course on sort of comparative religions so we could learn about other faiths in addition to Judaism. And he took us to, this was in Santa Barbara, California. He took us to a Catholic folk mass, which was completely different than anything I'd ever seen before. So I think Columbus Day historically was an opportunity for Americans to learn about this group. Roman Catholics are a roughly 1/7 or 1/8 of the world population. For good or for bad, the Roman Catholic Church and faith have had a profound impact on the history of the world and the history of this country. And so I think it's a very good thing for us to learn something about it and to learn about Italian Americans and what they've brought to this country. And so again, historically, that's what Columbus Day was about. So in honor of Columbus Day, I wanted to honor Italian culture. And so my thinking was, who is the most famous Italian American? And of course, if you know anything about American popular music, and I don't mean most recent popular music, I mean popular music over 150, almost 200 years that it's been a part of American culture. So you've heard of a man by the name of Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was very proud of his Italian heritage. I would argue that Frank Sinatra may have been the most popular performer of all time in this country. Certainly, he's at the very, very top. Now, it may be that somebody like Taylor Swift, she's made more money in concerts, or maybe had more people come to see her. Of course, there are a lot more people in this country now. There are much larger venues, but in his day, there is no doubt that Frank Sinatra was the most popular singer of his day, rivaled only by probably Bing Crosby, who he supplanted, and then toward the other end of his career by Elvis Presley. And there were kind of good-natured rivalry between Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, and between Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley as well. Although if you've ever seen video of them interacting, Elvis was incredibly respectful of Frank Sinatra. He knew, I think, that in some ways his career really stood on the shoulders of this man who developed the ability for individual singers really to break through and have the kind of success that Frank Sinatra had, and that Elvis Presley had. So Sinatra was, first of all, a singer. He sang with the Dorsey Band early in his career, and he actually sang with another band before Dorsey, and I'm going up on the name of that band. But he went to that band leader when Dorsey asked him to become a singer, and the band leader said, by all means, the Dorsey organization is a fine organization. You'll have a lot of success there. And Frank Sinatra did. And then eventually he went out on his own. He recorded, I think, thousands of songs during his career. He's probably best known for, I think generally people best know him for New York, New York. Start spreading the news, I'm leaving today. However, those who of us like me who are big Sinatra fans, the song that I think most epitomizes Frank Sinatra is the song My Way. And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. And it's a song about how a man has to live his life his way, my way, which is really what Frank Sinatra did. For all of the shall we say not so noble things that he did in his life, I don't want to get into them, but if you read about Frank Sinatra, you know that you will find that he was an absolutely loyal friend, an absolutely loyal American, just devoted to people. His career entertaining was really based on his desire to bring some happiness, some relief to people, and some enjoyment to people. And so again, those are probably his two best known songs, but he recorded all kinds of songs. Fly Me to the Moon. Gosh, I'm trying to think. There's so many. They All Laughed, one of my favorites, which mentions Marconi, for inventing the radio. But he also had a career in acting, and he did both dramatic roles as well as comedy and musical comedy. So probably his his greatest musical comedy role was as Nathan Detroit in not Pie Pie Purdy, in Guys and Dolls. He also was famous for what are known as the Rat Pack films, the best one of which is the original Ocean's 11. And it is an absolutely iconic film. It's shot in Las Vegas. By then, Frank Sinatra and his Rat Packers that included Dean Martin primarily, and Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford, and the fellow that played Mr. Roper on Three's Company. I used to know his daughter. I'm going up on his name, but anyway, it's about a heist that takes place in Las Vegas. It is a wonderful film of its time. To read about the history of the film is so much fun. It was sort of the epitome of this group that really had taken Las Vegas by storm. I have not seen the remake, and I tend not to see remakes of iconic films because I frankly think it's pointless. But perhaps the best acting role he had was his Academy Award-winning role in From Here to Eternity, and he had a co-starring role. And I'm going up on the character's name, but he was in that film with, among others, Ernest Borgnine, who's another absolutely wonderful individual. I had the absolute pleasure of meeting him twice. Just a wonderful, wonderful man. But From Here to Eternity from 1953, if you have not seen that movie, it is an absolutely iconic film and really stands on its feet even now, 70 plus years later. So Sinatra also, as I mentioned, was incredibly charitable. He looked after his friends. He would literally give them the shirt off his back. He had times of great success. He had times when he had completely fallen out of favor. And then he came back on top again. I know I saw him perform live very late in his career in Long Beach. At that point, it was a little bit sad. He clearly did not have, he was not fully in his faculties, but it was nonetheless great to see this absolute icon of American popular culture perform live. I'm glad I did, even though I would love to have seen him earlier in his career, particularly in Las Vegas. I wasn't really old enough for that to happen. So one of the pieces that Frank Sinatra did that I think is most impactful was a 1945 short film in which he essentially starred. And the film, throughout his entire life, Frank Sinatra was dedicated to combating prejudice and bigotry in this country. And just a short anecdote about that. He was very, very, very close friends with Sammy Davis Jr. And when Jack Kennedy ran for president, Frank Sinatra marshaled all of his resources on behalf of Kennedy's election campaign. And one of the things that he did was he worked with Sammy Davis Jr. in order to get Black Americans to come out and vote for Kennedy. And of course, John Kennedy won the presidency, and he asked Sinatra to put together an inauguration show. And Sinatra invited Sammy Davis Jr. to be a part of the show. And in what is frankly a very shameful incident, Jack Kennedy had his brother Robert call Sinatra and tell him that despite the work that Sammy Davis Jr. had done on his campaign, he was not welcome at the inauguration because at the time, Sammy Davis Jr. was either dating or married to a white woman. And Sinatra basically never forgave Kennedy for that. He was absolutely appalled at the lack of gratitude and the bigotry exhibited by that. The Kennedys justified it because at the time the South was heavily Democratic, and the idea of miscegenation, I think it was called, the relationship between a Black man and a white woman was just unthinkable in the American South in 1960. And true to his creed, he stuck by Sammy Davis Jr. and again, that was kind of the end of not only his friendship with Jack Kennedy, but also Peter Lawford, who was Jack Kennedy's brother-in-law. I believe he had married one of Kennedy's sisters. So, he was, for people say many, not nice things about Frank Sinatra, but he was a man of principle. And at the top of those principles was that everybody in America needs to be treated with decency and needs to have equal opportunity. So in 1945, he participated in this short film, and it basically, he walks out of a theater after ostensibly a performance, and he sees a bunch of young boys, and they're beating up this one kid. And they're basically beating him up because he's not the same religion that they are. And now, Frank Sinatra was always a small man, but at this point in his career, he was also he was known for being like tiny. He was very thin. He was not a particularly tall man, and he was young. This was he was very well known. Of course, that's why the producers wanted him to do this film. But he was a young man, and he was 30 years old at the time, or 29 at the time, but he looked much younger than that, and so Sinatra basically, breaks up the fight, and he asks, he's like, "What's going on here with you?" And so they have this dialogue about it, and I want to read you what Sinatra says to the boys at the end of this dialogue in this short film. He says, "Look, fellas, religion makes no difference, except maybe to a Nazi or somebody as stupid." Now, 1945, we were still involved in World War II. The film was made at the beginning of 1945, so Nazi Germany had not surrendered yet. And so you can see that you could call this propaganda. I think, okay, not all propaganda is bad. But so I'm going to start again. Look, fellas, religion makes no difference, except maybe to a Nazi or somebody as stupid. Why, people all over the world worship God in many different ways. God created everybody. He didn't create one people better than another. Your blood's the same as mine. Mine's the same as his. And he gestures to the bullied kid. Do you know what this wonderful country is made of? It's made up of 100 different kind of people, and 100 different ways of talking, and 100 different ways of going to church, but they're all American ways. Wouldn't we be silly if we went around hating people because they combed their hair different than ours? Wouldn't we be a lot of dopes? My dad came from Italy, but I'm an American. But should I hate your father because he came from Ireland or France or Russia? Wouldn't that be a first-class fathead? You guys remember Pearl Harbor? Why the Japs socked us so it looked like we could never do anything about it. But a couple of days later, something very important happened. Close your eyes and let me tell you about it. Come on, close your eyes. Go on, we want you to imagine it. There was a Jap battleship, the Haruna, and one of our planes spotted it. You know what it takes to bomb a battleship? It takes guts and know-how and teamwork. And our boys sure needed plenty of it because the Japs were throwing up enough flak to get out and walk home on. But the pilot had only one thing on his mind, to get over that ship, and he did. And then the bombardier pushed a button, and a 500-pound tomato smacked that Jap ship right in the middle. Yep, they sank it. And every American threw his head back and felt much better. The pilot of that ship, the pilot of the airplane, was named Colin Kelly, an American and a Presbyterian. And you know who dropped the bombs? Mayor Levin, an American and a Jew. You think maybe they should have called the bombing off because they had different religions? Now, look, the term Jap, not a nice word to hear, of course, but in the context of World War II, we were fighting Imperial Japan, and of course, that's how Americans spoke then. So, not wishing to minimize that, but setting it aside, Frank Sinatra in this short film makes the point about how our ethnicity, our heritage, our religion, he doesn't specifically say skin color, but you can see in the film there are boys of different skin color there. These are not things to divide us. We are all Americans. We should all be together, and we should all think of ourselves as one country, one people. So he ends the short film singing a song called "The House I Live In." Now, I'm not going to sing the song to you. I don't have Frank Sinatra's voice, or for that matter, anybody else's but my own. But I do want to wrap up this show by reading you the lyrics of this song, because I think in many ways this is really what Columbus Day is celebrating. Again, just going back to its history, it's celebrating a group of immigrants that came here that wanted to be looked at as loyal Americans while retaining the cultural connections to the country of their ancestry. And so this is what Frank Sinatra sings at the end of that short film. The house I live in. What is America to me? A name, a map, or a flag I see? A certain word, democracy. What is America to me? The house I live in, a plot of earth, the street, the grocer and the butcher, or the people that I meet. The children in the playground, the faces that I see. All races and religions. That's America to me. The place I work in, the worker by my side, the little town, the city where my people lived and died, the howdy and the handshake, the air of feeling free, and the right to speak your mind out, that's America to me. The things I see about me, the big things and the small, that little corner newsstand or the house a mile tall, the wedding and the churchyard, the laughter and the tears, the dream that's been a growing for more than 200 years. So it's such a powerful song. And I encourage you to go to YouTube. You can search out Sinatra, The House I Live In, and you can watch this short. You can watch, or you can listen to him sing the song, and remember on this Columbus Day that we are all Americans. Those of us who lived here before Europeans came here, those of us who came in the or whose ancestors came on the Mayflower, those of us who came later. I know my ancestors came here in the very late 19th century and early 20th century, and down to people who are coming here today. I think Columbus Day celebrates that America is a place that people want to come to for the opportunity that it gives them. A country that has tried to be ever more welcoming, ever more open to the diverse ideas and cultures and religions of people in the world. We struggle at times, we make mistakes, but in the end, we should all, I think, strive to emulate Frank Sinatra in striving for equality of opportunity and for decent treatment of all our fellow citizens and all people in America. So I thank you very much for joining me today on this special edition of the Way to Wow shows for Columbus Day. I hope you have a happy and a meaningful holiday, whatever you're going to be doing. And just before I leave off, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And I'm going to be talking about one of the best known military books that is also used as a basis for business ideas, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And so I invite you to tune in for that. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m. is my show, People Making Money. And it is our monthly economic echoes where we look at the state of your economy. So I look at a number of economic indicators, break them down so that you can see how is what's going on in the economy affecting me, my family, my loved ones, my friends, my business, my professional practice. It's all good and well for the newspapers or media outlets to report, 2.4% inflation. None of us experience price increases or decreases based on the CPI because of how the CPI is put together, for example. So we dig beneath the surface, go into the details so you can really see that. And other than that, again, wishing you a happy and meaningful Columbus Day, and signing off as I always do. Well, wishing you also a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.